Today we're going to be looking at this is our time. And by the way, yesterday was not our time. I am thankful for the faithful men from the patriarchs to the apostles, but that was not our time. Yesterday was not our time. I'm thankful for Noah, for his faithfulness, and that he and his wife and his sons and their wives preserved the human race because of the flood destroying everything else. But that was not our time. I'm thankful for Joseph and the faithfulness we can read of in his life, and the way, in fact, that it provided a place for his people to come during that famine, to remain safe, and to be preserved basically in the land of Goshen, not be influenced by the Canaanites while they became a great nation. But that was not our time. I'm thankful for Moses, that leader who then went back to Egypt and helped to lead the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage. But that was not our time. I'm thankful to Joshua, one of only two of the spies that came back and said, we can take the land. But unfortunately, as those 10 spies persuaded the people and brought fear to their hearts, then there was that wilderness wanderings. But Joshua prevailed, and he was that leader of the Israelites to conquer Canaan. But that was not our time. I'm thankful for David, that second king of Israel, that one that we recognize as the one after God's own heart. I'm thankful for the many writings that he gave us in the book of Psalms. But again, that was not our time. I'm thankful for Elijah, that prophet of God, the many things that he did, and the way he proved the power of God in his day. But that was not our time. I'm thankful for Peter, that apostle of Jesus Christ, and that one who, as we find singled out in Acts chapter 2, standing up with the 11, presenting that message on that day of Pentecost. But that was not our time. I'm thankful for Paul, that last apostle, and the missionary journeys and the writings that we have from Paul. But that was not our time. I am also thankful for the reformers to the restorers to the preachers who evangelized America. I'm thankful for John Wycliffe, who opposed the Pope and translated the Bible into the language of the people. But that was not our time. I'm thankful for Martin Luther in that he challenged the Catholic Church and eventually left the Catholic Church. But that was not our time. I'm thankful for men like Alexander Campbell and Barton Stone who sought to restore the New Testament church. I'm also thankful for men such as Raccoon John Smith who baptized thousands and sometimes converted entire churches. But once again, their time was not our time. I'm also thankful for men like Walter Scott who converted thousands. And we can be thankful for all those who preach the Jerusalem gospel. But yet that was not our time. Now ahead of us is a future. We've talked about the past. Of course, we didn't live in those days. But I suggest to you, we might not even get to the future. There was a Sunday morning many years ago, and I had preached that Sunday as a typical Sunday in South Mississippi. A horrible rainstorm came through during the preaching. And there was a family with their 2 grandchildren, grandma, grandpa, and 2 grandchildren on their way back home. And a big truck, 2-lane road, jackknifed as they were nearing that truck. And there was a head-on collision. And that grandma and that grandpa, they didn't get a future. They had that Sunday as their last day. We may or may not get to the future. And so we'd have to say The future's not our time. Not now. We read, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." And so clearly, tomorrow may not be our future because we may not get the future. In Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 15, there Jesus speaks about man and his material possessions, but he also presents something there about the future that doesn't come. He said to them, "Take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops." And he said, "I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years." That's what he was thinking. There's many years. Relax and eat and drink and be merry. But God said to him, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you." So here's a man thinking, I've got a future, but he didn't live to that future. It is the case. It may be that we don't get the future. The future never becomes ours. We have to say that tomorrow is promised to no one. And that's how we kind of come to a conclusion. Our time is now. We had better go back and study about Moses and Abraham and Joseph and Moses and Joshua. We need to learn from the prophets, from the writings. But that was not our time. We had better go back and read and study what the apostles and holy prophets wrote within the New Testament. And we can have great appreciation for the examples of such men as Peter and Paul. But again, we didn't live in that time. That was not our time. Our time is now. Our time is today. You know, if we were to think about our time, it's a time when about 1 million babies are aborted each year. Sadly, that number was even higher years gone by, as many as 1.5 million babies plus a year aborted. And since 1973, when abortion became legal in the United States, there have been about 54 million babies aborted. That number, 54 million, is staggering. In fact, it's hard to comprehend. It's the population at this juncture of many states put together. Babies that were aborted. Our time, it's a time when God's teaching about marriage so disregarded that 2/3 of all couples marrying in our nation lived together for more than 2 years before they married. And friends, this is a disregard concerning marriage. We live at a time when there's about 1 divorce for every 2 marriages that take place. Again, a disregard of what God teaches. And yes, it's a time when God's teaching about marriage is so disregarded that same-sex marriage is now legal in the United States and many other countries in the world. That's the time we live in. It's also a time of increasing violence. I was literally shocked a few weeks ago when I read about 5 separate shootings for a total of 11 people shot in one day, a Saturday, March 23rd, 2019, in this city. And when I read things like that, I'm almost reminded of Genesis 6:13. God said to Noah, I've determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence. When you pick up your newspaper or turn on the radio or the TV and you hear about these shootings or these bombings where literally dozens of people are killed, when you read sometimes about the innocence, a person going into a school and killing those children, when you read about every weekend one or two killed seemingly in our very city, you can't help but think the earth is filled with violence. And sometimes when I read about that time that precipitated the flood, I think, are we any different? And so as we consider our time, there's a lot of sad things, bad things, sinful things going on. Even it's a time of increasing unbelief. Just very recently, a survey showed that no religion, sometimes referred to as the nuns. You know, if you were to say, what religion do you have? And somebody says, none. So they're called the nuns. N-O-N-E-S. That there's more of the nuns having no religion more than any other single religious group. The Catholics compose 23% of our nation. Evangelicals, 22.5%. The nuns, if you would, that say they have no religion, 23%. And so it's a time of increasing unbelief. But also our time is a time of great prosperity. The standard of living is higher than at any time in our nation's past, and I would suggest any time in the history of this world. It's a time of technological advancement. I would think that I'd quit being surprised at kind of what's taking place. But no, I continue to be surprised about the technological advancements in our world and how it's being made available to just the everyday person. It's a time of great opportunities in many ways. In many, many ways. And it's also a time of great need to be committed to the Lord above all else and active in His work. I would hope that when we look at those patriarchs of the Old Testament, the apostles of the New Testament, and we recognize, no, I don't live then, but we would take their example and see, this is how I need to be in this present time, in our time. This is our time. It's our time, number one, to stand. In Ephesians 6:13, Paul said, therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil days, and having done all, to stand. Now I think that you'd have to conclude that we are living in some evil days, and what Paul said in Ephesians 6:13 was certainly as applicable today as it was then. And what is he doing? He's saying, now you stand firm. It's kind of interesting that 7 times in the New Testament we read this, stand firm. It's kind of like you get a grip and you hold on. You get your ground and you stay there. Whether it's spiritually or morally, religiously. Now within the context, here we find Ephesians 6 beginning in verse 10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And that's when you then get to the verse 13, that he says to stand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. And so I hope it is that we have a commitment we have a firm commitment. I'm going to stand. I'm going to stand for what's right. I'm going to stand for what the Bible teaches. I'm going to stand for what's good. I'm going to stand for what my God teaches within His Bible. That I will take that stand. You know, it's also a time to give. As I was looking at this, and I just wanted to look at, okay, the number of times we find that word time within the New Testament. After all, I'm saying this is our time. So I wanted to see that word time. Well, oftentimes, often occasions, that passage that had the word time wasn't so applicable to our lesson today. But one I thought was interesting was how the word time was used with regards to a context on giving in 2 Corinthians 8, verses 12 through 14. And here Paul said, "For if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time," there it is, that word time, he said, "that your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness." This was within a context of giving. In essence, he's saying, yes, it's our time to give. That was to the Corinthians. That'd be no less true today. In fact, if you were to talk about the prosperity, once again, our time and our nation has known the greatest prosperity probably of any period of history. And the average person is living a better standard of living than ever thought possible by people who lived before us. And so certainly, yes, this present time for us, it's our time to give. It's also our time to use the day wisely. In Ephesians 5:16, there Paul said, "making the best use of the time, because the days are evil." Again, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Once again, as you just consider in times gone by and now the present time, most of the people in our country are working 40 hours in a week. Now there's many that are working the 50 to 60 hours and some even more. But the basic work week is a 40-hour work week. If you went in some parts of the world, they've even reduced it less than the 40 hours. And then if you were to consider, well, what takes place outside these 40? Frankly, yes, life is easier. We don't have to use a scrub board anymore, do we? We've got washing machines. We don't even have to use a clothesline. Most people don't even own one anymore. They've got a dryer. In fact, we don't even wash our own dishes. We use a dishwasher. In other words, many things about life's become easier. Things have become even faster. I take my leftover eggs in the morning and I can have them warm in 30 seconds. And I can have my breakfast. And I can take that leftover biscuit and I can slice it and put it in the toaster. Toasted biscuits are really good. And I can have a breakfast, well, in about a minute and a half. Yet we've got more time on our hands than probably we've ever had. We're not having to work the fields. Most of the time we're not putting the food up in the freezer or canning. I can't imagine the days of the horse and buggy. And I really cannot imagine because I was not born in those days. My granddaddy had 2 mules and he plowed those 2 mules and there was a wagon, but I never saw those mules hitched up to that wagon. We get in a car and we go miles in just a matter of minutes. I know we stay busy. We wonder, well, where is our time gone? The reality, we do have more time, disposable time, time where we choose what to do with it than probably people at any time in this world's history. So what are we doing with our time? Well, I can promise you that God wants us to make the best use of our time. Are we making the best use of our time and using our time wisely. It's also our time. It's our time to pray. In Hebrews chapter 4, beginning in verse 14, Hebrew writer said, "Since then we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace." This would be prayer, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. In time of need, be praying. But I'd suggest to you, if you can pray in the time of need, it's because you've been praying when maybe there was the less of a need. This particular need, no, you didn't have it previously, but you'd been praying. You know, sometimes I hear people speak of, I prayed and God didn't do. I asked God to help. And then they want to indict God and say He didn't help. But I can't help but wonder, were we His faithful child? Had we been praying? Had we been on our knees? Had our voice gone to the throne of heaven? Or was it like when those words were heard, it was like, who's this? The person was a stranger. Maybe even the person, as it were, was an alien before God. Let's be the ones who pray without ceasing. Then there's the time of need. Oh, bear down on the prayers. And pray frequently. And pray hard. But let it be that we've been praying. Yes, our time is a time to pray. And I would suggest to you as well that our time is a time to evangelize. This evangelism is critical in every generation. It is the case certainly that it is critical now. When the Lord gave His disciples the Great Commission, had they turned their back on the Great Commission, where would the church be? Where would the hope for salvation have ended? Had they ignored the Great Commission, you wouldn't have an Acts 2. You wouldn't have an Acts 8. You wouldn't have an Acts 16 where you read of the conversions. And what happens today if we, our time, we cease to be evangelistic? We cease to invite our friends. We cease to tell others about Jesus. What happens then? Well, we might even say, well, the church is alive and there's various congregations. No evangelism? No more Christians? No more additions to the churches? And then what happens when the people in those churches get old? And what happens when those people in those churches die? Yes, evangelism is critical in every generation, and it is critical now. And I hope I take it to heart to realize this is for me. I'm a Christian. This is for me. It's not just the elders. It's not just the preacher. It's not just those on the payroll. It's for me too. And lastly, it's our time to be saved. The passage we looked at as we began this morning was 2 Corinthians 6:2. For he says, in a favorable time I listened to you, and in a day of salvation I have helped you. Behold, now is the favorable time. Now is the day of salvation. I would beg of you to understand and realize that, right, we don't know about tomorrow. We don't know about the future. I hope that all of you make it home safely. I hope that you wake up tomorrow. But there's no guarantee of it. And I think that's why it would be emphasized. Behold, now is the favorable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Jesus has died on that cross. His blood was shed. God's mercy and God's grace will save. But it doesn't save me when I hold up my hands towards heaven and say, no, God, I've refused it. I will not obey. But for those who would accept in faith, turning from their sin, that's repentance, confessing that faith and being baptized for the forgiveness of sins. Yes, it could be said, now, today, is the day of salvation. I hope that you'd realize, yes, this is our time. And this is our time for so many things, and this is even the day. But on this list, the most important is that last one, your own personal salvation. Procrastination is the thief of time. Don't put off becoming a Christian. Don't put off salvation. Yes, this is our time. If we could assist you in your obedience this morning, if there's that need to be baptized for the forgiveness of sins, if there's that need to make a confession of sin before this audience and this group to pray on your behalf, if there's other needs for prayer, we ask that you'd come as we stand.